Hi there. In this video, we will wrap up our previous discussion on interviewing and interrogation. If you remember, we tried to differentiate between interviewing and interrogation in my previous videos. When we say interviewing is mainly for collecting evidence in more details. And interviewing should be planned properly. And there was 10 commandments. I mentioned them in my previous videos. That we need to follow when we make successful interview. And when we do the interview, we have to plan, we have to make introduction to build rapport with the interviewee. And then we narrate all the questions, give a chance to the interviewee to answer, and then we wrap up the interview. However, when we come to interrogation, here we see confession from the interviewee, and we collect evidence. And when we start asking the witnesses, we start by the third-party witness, then corroborative witness, then co-conspirator, and then we head to the target or the suspect. And after collecting evidence, we come into interrogation to seek confession. And then when we seek confession, then we go to the court here to get the admission of the suspect or the perpetrator of the offense or the fraud. And here we have to take like bold steps where we accuse the suspect clearly in front of the judge or in the interrogation that the subject is committing the offense. And then we observe the reaction of the subject, and then we repeat the accusation again, and we try to interrupt any denials that comes from the suspect and try to provide a rationalization or good reasons or justification for what happened. And if the suspect try to prove that he or she was not in the crime scene during this time, then we have to diffuse any alibi that might come out from the suspect. So we have to be clear that the suspect was there, and based on the information collected, he is the one who committed the fraud. And then we present any alternative solution that might go into this discussion to say that these alternatives cannot be accepted. And then we obtain the admission and transition to the verbal confession, and then we close off the case. So this is what we do it at the end of all of our examination process. Now, when we get the signed statement that this suspect has made the offense, then we have to do some procedures here. First, the written statement has greater credibility than oral, so we have to make sure that everything is in writing better than verbal confession, because the person can deny later on that he said that he committed the fraud. We have to mention also some items, as you can see them here: the intention for the fraud, the approximate date of the fraud or the offense, the amount of losses that might happen during this crime, the number of incidents that happened during that day, any willingness to cooperate from the interviewee or the suspect with the interrogator, any clause that we need to execute, and then have the confessor read the statement clearly, make sure it is truthful, there is no lie or confusion or misleading statement, and then we get the signature. I know in theory we can do that. In reality, it might be difficult because there is no suspect will come easily and confess that he or she committed the offense. So I know in this presentation, you might feel, well, in real life, it might not happen. Yes, but I'm explaining how it should happen in the court case and to show you how difficult is the role of the forensic accountant or the fraud examiner to get the job done in a professional way. Now, during the interrogation or the interview, there might be some kind of deception or lie. What shall we do to identify the deception or the lie or the misleading that comes from the interviewee, we have to check first the physiological movement that might happen, the verbal cues that might come from the interviewee or the suspect, and the body language that might happen as well. And then it will be up to the interviewer to make the right judgment. And usually it takes time and experience from the interviewer to learn how to distinguish between deception and reality. And in the coming slide, I will explain each one of those 4 items. The physiology of deception. Usually when a person starts to develop lie, they develop some kind of a stress because by default, their conscience might not feel comfortable to say a lie. So first of all, the human body might attempt to relieve stress through verbal and non-verbal cues, which I will mention them in the coming slides. But this can tell you here, the inside stress will be expressed in different ways that the interviewer should take as hints that what is mentioned is not true, it is deceiving. And then the interviewer should draw some inference from these kind of behaviors. First, like the deception could happen either outright lies, so it's a very clear one, or the deception can happen by omission of information, not telling everything, but half or portion of the information instead of this one. Or it could be misdirection where the interviewer is focused on one area, but the interviewer is trying to diffuse the interviewer from the main way. So here we misdirect the interviewer or attempt to manage the interviewer perception. So we try to take control of the mindset of the interviewer by deceiving him. So there are different ways of deception. It's not only pure lie, but we can make other things, as you can see here, that it ends up to the same result, which is deception. Here we have to check the environment, and this is the reason in my previous video I said the interviewer should leave a distance of 6 feet between him and the interviewee to watch what happened in the body language and the verbal communication between them. Also, the interviewer should learn to avoid any personal bias. And this happens from the junior interviewers that when they start their career in forensic accountant, they might develop bias. But after some time, the interviewer will gain experience on how to eliminate any personal bias and try to, of course, to avoid any time where the interviewee under the influence of drugs or medicine, because this might make the whole interview non-accepted by the court. And also behavior of juveniles is unreliable because they are not mature. And then we have to check the ethnic and the economic factors of the interviewee. From where he's coming, what is the economic status, what is the family status of the interviewee, because this can give some ideas to the interviewer about the deception that might happen during the interview. So in brief, to identify the deception, we have to check the physiological changes that might happen during the interview. Then we come to the verbal cues. There are some hints in the way of communication can give good indication to the interviewer that there is a deception. One of them, the change in the speech pattern. So sometimes, the person starts to raise up the voice or lower the voice or make some kind of silence in the middle of the talk. This means that the interviewer trying to process or come up with the answer that might be plausible to the interviewer, but it's not true. So the change in the speech pattern is a good way to indicate there is a deception that might be happening now. Then repetition of the question. when the interviewer is asking a question, the interviewee is repeating the same question. Why? To give himself enough time to come up with a deception or deceptive answer. So repeating the question by the interviewee after the interviewer mentioned the question clearly, it's a hint to say there is some deception on my behalf. Comments regarding the interview. If the interviewee start to develop some comments on the questions, this might be a way of deception to give the interviewee enough time to come up with a story. Selective memory, it means mention something and omission of other side of information. This might be a hint as well. Making excuses, whether excuses to go to the bathroom or excuses to say that he cannot answer or excuses of being uncomfortable in sitting. Giving excuses, it's a way of a hint for deceptions. Or if the person keep swearing or making oath during the answer, this is a cue for deception. So here the interview would try to make some kind of solemn oath to tell the interviewer that he is telling the truth. Honestly, this is a hint for deception rather than of telling the truth. A character testimony, answering with a question. So if the interviewer is asking a question, the interviewee, instead of answering, asking the interviewer another question. This also can be a good way of deception. Overuse of respect. If we find that the interviewee is showing high respect, like telling the interviewer, sir, or giving a title to the fraud examiner, showing over respect, this is honestly a hint for deception. So trying to inflate the ego of the interviewer to distract him from the interview and telling deception. Increasing weaker denial. So if the interviewee trying to keep denying that he committed this act, this is also a way of deception. Failure to deny also, it's a way of deception. Avoidance of emotive words, refusal to implicate other suspects. So if the interviewee try to exclude all the other people, this might be a way of deception. Tolerant attitude, trying to show that he is patient. This is also a way of deceptions. Reluctance to terminate the interview. If we find the interviewee is wishing to extend the interview time, this might be a way of deception because he wants to make up the story and want to make sure that during the interview, the interviewer is convinced about this fictitious story. So this is another way. Feigned unconcern, it means if he doesn't give high respect to the interview and he doesn't care much about this process of questioning. The nonverbal cues, it's actually the body language, as I said, and we should be able to find this one. A good example here, the movement of the shoulders, the body, crossing the arm, if the person put his hand over his mouth, or if he keeps scratching his ears all the time, or trying to play with his nose, or giving fake smiles, all these ones are good non-verbal cues of deception. Or sitting on the chair as if he's pushing his leg towards the door, fleeing position. This might be a hint for deception, or making some fictitious reaction to the evidence. All these hints can be good indicators for deception. The next one, now the interviewer, he was able to see the physiological changes, the verbal and the non-verbal hints, and it's up to the interviewer to judge the deception. It's very hard, it's very challenging, especially if the interviewer is still junior or still at the beginning stage of this career. It might be hard for him to distinguish between truth and deception. The reasons that persons fail to identify lies. So if a junior examiner is working, he might fail because he might get the tendency to believe the people. So after some time, the examiner will build up, like the skills to remove the personal bias and take each case independently. But it could happen here that the examiner might believe the people, maybe naive or simple-minded, behavior are incorrectly judges. So if the person is making like either verbal cues or non-verbal cues, but the person couldn't interpret them correctly, truthful behavior is easy to imitate. So sometimes, like the person might be able to interpret the cues as good behaviors. Like, for example, if the interviewee is showing high respect to the interviewer might get it as appreciation to what he's doing. And this is honestly, it will be misjudgment for the deception. Deceitful behavior is actually a response to stress, not deceit. So we have to distinguish between deceitful behavior and a stressful behavior during the interview. We ignore here the truthful behavior cues. We need to look for the deceptive cues. Clusters of behavior cues are more suggestive of deceits. If we collect more than one evidence or more than one hints, this can be a good indicator for deception. So I hope now you are able to distinguish between the interview, the interrogation, and how can we judge any deceit that might happen during the interview and the interrogation. Thank you so much. And we will continue our discussion about the next step in forensic accounting in the coming videos, where we talk about the ID and the data sets that we need to review when we make fraud examination. And this will be presented in the next section. Thank you. Bye-bye.